what do you recognize as being music? I think in the brain, the important thing is prediction. So this is what music does all the time. It goes like da 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 wah. So now you have a prediction of a note, right? Ba, probably. And if it then goes wah, the first time you might be a little bit scared, but then you'll say, well, it's actually kind of nice. So the whole statistical process of prediction. So you have statistics that say it's probably going this way, and then there's also a possibility that it could go in a different direction. This is what music plays around with, and this is what I think is necessary for us to recognize it as music, because that's where we see the intention. That's where or intention of the composer, for instance. This is where it grabs our attention, because if you can just predict everything, the brain will stop listening to it. Like if you just hear a rhythm going like duk 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 duk, then after a while you stop listening to it.
But what about meditative music? What about music that might have as an intention to be meditative, where people just really listen to repetitive things? Techno is one example, I guess.
Exactly.
And then there's other types of music where
that I'll be there just in a few seconds, because it's important for me to say that there are two ends of this spectrum. So there's this end where you can predict everything, and then there's the other part of the spectrum where it's noise, so you can't predict anything. So noise is basically, statistically, noise is just stuff which is randomly distributed, right? So you can't predict what is going. You have a note, and then you cannot predict the next note. There's no way you can predict it. So for it to be music, it has to be somewhere between these two things. And actually, a lot of the research we have done has shown that there is a sweet spot, so that the brain can understand what is the model, what is the prediction, but it gets something new. But and there's a sweet spot for that, so you have to have exactly the right amount of new stuff for you to be really engaged in it, and that can be different from person to person and culture to culture. So, but just to get back to your interesting question from before, I don't know who of you who was asking this, but then you say, well, it's super predictive when you listen to trance music or to EDB or what is it called, electronic dance music, EDM, for instance, right? It's super predictable, but in fact, it's not. Because what these kinds of music will do is they'll set up a groove, and it might feel meditative, but it still is playing around with your predictions, because what it usually will be going, it will usually have these kind of things that are very, very predictive. But when you have these very predictive structures, then suddenly if something is changing just a little bit, you'll hear that small thing. This is the whole idea about minimalism in a way. But if you think about these rhythms, for instance, like do k do do k do k do do k, then it could go on like that for 20 minutes, and you'll still keep dancing to it. And that's simply because part of your brain are listening to this rhythm and say, oh, there's a couple of beats here that are not like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So and this is what my motor system, the motor system in the brain, wants to go like 1, 2, 3, 4. But your auditory system, what comes in through your ears, dum k dum dum k dum k dum dum k, is just a little bit off, So
isn't that culturally as well? Because I listen a lot to Brazilian music, and there they obviously have this bakt kat takt kat takt kat takt.
Exactly.
Where you have this, where it feels just as off as the example as you give, and that to me makes it very interesting, because it's not like on exactly on the
Exactly.
8s and 16s.
Exactly,
But
and
maybe somebody else might not find that interesting at all.
But that's basically because I lived in Brazil for 3 months many years ago, and I got to play with some really good musicians down there. And it was the problem was that they were listening to me and they were saying, "Yeah, you're playing the right notes, but you're not playing it in the right way." And this is very culturally determined. It took me a while until I could really appreciate this thing, that it's like it's dragging in some places and it's rushing in other places. It's a very specific thing, and that's exactly because what the brain is doing, according to the newest models of how brains are working, is that it's making predictive models. So it's all about trying to predict the future. And when we learn, what we do is that we update our predictive models, and that's what we interpret the world from. But our predictive model, if we just get that through our senses, nothing will happen in the brain. So what you can say is that in the Brazilian way, they have a predictive model which already has a lot of these things that are dragging and rushing in it. So that's the model they have, and from that they hear the differences. So that's why we cannot understand why it's good. We cannot understand when they hear something that is slightly new to them, to their brains. We'll just say, "Oh, wasn't it the same as the other things?"
But why would it still be interesting if I've listened to it for years now and I still find it interesting? It wouldn't.
It's a super good explanation. But that's because there are different systems in the brain that have different predictions that are then sort of creating error between them. I was talking about before, like the motor system and the auditory system will work in different ways that creates sort of this conflict between them, which your brain says, "Oh, I need to solve that conflict." Just to explain this in a slightly different way, because it's a super good question. And that is, how can you keep on listening to the same music even though you've heard the same 3-minute pop song, and then 2 months later you're still listening to it? Because you know everything that's going to happen. But there's a thing that your memory systems in the brain probably work in different ways. Because part of your memory system knows what is going to happen because it has heard it before. We call that veridical memory. The memory simply of how that song goes. But that song contains stuff that is different from all the other songs that you've heard. So if before I went the reason why we know that it's going to the last note is that of 100 songs, then the 99 songs having this will go like that. But the 100th song that goes in a different way, for that, even though you hear it 1,000 times, you'll still know that it was different from your schematic knowledge. So your schematic memory, your memory of how it's supposed to be. So these memory systems are sort of in conflict with each other, and that's what really great composers and good musicians are able to play with, so that you will never get tired of a song.
Hang on, so you're basically saying that there is a prediction error not just between two different brain systems, but also between different parts of the same brain system. So different parts of the memory system, basically.
You're getting that exactly right. Like, for instance, I have certain songs that I really hate. Very few actually, but like I really hate the song Memory, da 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 da. And the reason is not because of the, a little bit maybe too emotional content of it, but mainly because there's this modulation. It goes from one key to another key at a certain point of time. And that is so illogical to my brain, even though I've heard it 100 times at least. My memory system still, my schematic memory still goes, but it's wrong. This is not how music is supposed to be going, right?